Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to Conversations from Stritch. A special thank you to John Kilpatrick. I love that new opening. Last week was the first time we saw it, so I was kind of shocked by it. But this week, I just want to say thank you because I think it's great. We are incredibly excited this week to have everybody back on campus. And I got to say, I've been walking around since Tuesday on campus and seeing some of you in our different cafeteria spaces and sitting in the hallways. I loved seeing on, I think it was Tuesday, there were, three of our students, three of you, all listening to the same class at an appropriate distance, kind of a few feet away, but I could tell you were in an online class, but you were enjoying it together. And last night, went to the men's volleyball game. If any of you men's volleyball players are out there, I want to know what happened in the third set. So we just crushed them the first two sets, and then I don't know if we got lost our head game. But anyway, it was a good match, 3-1 that we won. Tonight we have men's and women's basketball. Really looking forward to going and seeing that tonight myself. And I know all of you can't go, so I shouldn't even be saying this, but because a few of us administrators are allowed in the gym, really have enjoyed seeing our athletes perform. A couple things that I want to talk about. There's so much exciting news in university news every week. And I'm going to try to highlight, as I open the show this semester, with just highlighting a couple of these. So one of the things that I want to talk about, Julia Igazio is one of our students who is a theater student and is going to be able to go to the National Kennedy Center, was picked out of a competitive set and is going to be able to go there and do do what she's trying to do here in terms of learning theater on the national stage. And so we're really excited for her to be chosen to represent Lewis University in that context. So congratulations to Julia on that. Also wanted to say that next week our show we're pretty sure is going to focus on athletics, and we're excited about welcoming to campus Raquel Ves, men's and women's tennis coach. Really excited about her joining the Lewis University family, and it's exciting, and we'll probably spend more time on that, both what the spring season has to offer next week, but also some of the new things that are going on in terms of the athletic department. The last thing I just want to mention is that on January 27th, we have the Imagining Restorative Justice in Will County event that's happening. Several of our faculty and members of the Lewis community are working to put that together, and it's an exciting event. This restorative justice notion is something actually I've spent some time on in my life, in my previous world of working with people in domestic violence situations and in the courtrooms. But this notion that, as a committee, one of our values is justice. We as a community want to make sure that we inform the broader community and our students about ways in which we can deal with restoring people to a holistic life in which they feel good about what they're doing, even after they've committed some kind of a crime, so that we're not just housing people in prisons permanently and pretending that we don't have a responsibility in reference to that. I'm not the person to really be talking about this, but I would like to invite you, and everybody can go back to University and News and there's many more examples of all the great things going on campus. I just mentioned 3 of them, but please make sure you pay attention to that. We'll talk about those and have some of those people as our guests in the coming weeks. I think that's really all I probably need to say. Maybe the last thing I'll say is, and you may mention this, Chris, our guest today, the governor being on probably as we're speaking, some of the things that's been in the news lately, the inauguration yesterday, the recommitment by this administration to get out 100 million vaccines in the 100 days. All of this for me is exciting as we begin the semester. I made the announcement last week at this show that we're planning on being in person next fall. But I really do want to say to the community, we are excited about the potential. It's kind of hope. We don't want to get overly excited. And as I said in my note at the beginning of on Tuesday as we began the semester, we have to remain vigilant. And I'm sure Chris and Nancy will also say that today. Let's keep the hope that we are beginning to turn a corner when it comes to COVID-19 and not lose our vigilance so that we are staying as a community healthy and safe. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Christopher Sent, who again joins me in studio today, and he'll introduce our guest and talk a little bit about COVID.
Great, thank you very much. Great to be with everyone. I am really excited to be listening to all that news. If you don't mind, I'm just going to add on a little bit around, I just want to stress how amazing of an accomplishment for Julia Aguizio to be going to the Kennedy Center Awards as a finalist. I believe there are 150 finalists across the entire United States from all universities. We had many great theater students competing in the regionals, which we always do, coming from our great theater program, but to be in that top tier is really a great accomplishment. And her area is stage management, I believe, and that's incredible skill. And that was for her work in one of the plays that we did last year, right before the beginning of COVID, I believe, the curious incident of the dog in the nighttime, if you remember that play that she was the stage director for. So it's a great opportunity. It is not going to be in person, so normally we'd be sending her to New York, and that would be really cool, but I think the event this year is going to be virtual. And I am really excited to welcome Raquel Vescovi as our new tennis coach, and looking forward to maybe inviting her on and talking with us, if not next week, then in a future week. And I guess we should thank the Grow Institute is primarily responsible for the restorative justice, and then the Diocese of Joliet is a co-sponsor of that event. So we're really always excited to collaborate with the diocese. And then I want to say we did get questions. Most of the questions are essentially for Nanci Reiland, our guest, so we will hold on most of them. One of them had to do, that related to vaccines and testing and so on. So we'll save those to talk about with Nanci. There's one question about commencement. We don't have any announcements or decision about commencement, so we are talking about it, modeling different scenarios everywhere from in-person to doing a virtual ceremony similar to what we did in December, and a few steps in between those things, and we're really engaged in that question, and we'll make an announcement as soon as we can. But as President Livingston said, there's so much evolution that is happening with our knowledge of COVID-19 and projection about the future and so on, that we want to wait a little bit longer before making any concrete decisions. Let's see, I guess one other thing maybe, I think we have a graphic of this before I go into the more nitty-gritty of COVID things, is that we do have, I believe, to show, well, I guess I just want to say generally, part of the beginning of the semester is that we have student life picking back up. So we have activities and opportunities to participate in things that are both in person and virtual, and this document's available, on the website, and it'll be linked in my email that I send out in a little while. But this just gives you a little bit of a taste of all the great things that are happening on campus this month. This calendar that we're looking at here is just for this month. And so again, there are in-person activities that are safe and organized to be safe, and then there are lots of virtual activities as well on that list. And then, as you can see there, also services such as health and counseling for our students that are available. So a couple of quick announcements about COVID, and then I want to share some information or some trend data from the fall semester before introducing Nanci. So a reminder, a huge number of our community has signed the spring semester Flyers Promise and Acknowledgement. And so just a reminder, if you haven't done it yet, please go to the app and sign that acknowledgement. remember to do the symptom screening every day before coming to campus if you have a class or are coming to work or what have you. As President Livingston said, the governor's probably going to announce some changes in our region and in the region where our Oak Brook campus is located today, lifting some of the Tier 3 mitigations, either going to Tier 2 or Tier 1. Those don't directly affect any of the activities that we do on campus. All of our rules will stay in place, but it is good. It's good news. It reflects a shift in the region, and it also may provide some opportunity for students and community members to have a little more freedom off campus. Every time I say something like that, I also want to immediately say, and we must continue to be vigilant about our safety and our commitment to the Flyers promise. The material, remember that the hotline team is available to you, not only to report positive results or symptoms, but also if you have any questions, their contact information is available on the website, in my email, and on the app. I was looking at the app sometime over the weekend, I think, or yesterday, and noticed that a student asked a question about where do you study? And you just mentioned that as where do you attend a class when you're not, when you're on campus? And so somebody generously reminded them that we have indoor reservation spaces. So, and that doesn't always work for every situation. So any creativity around that is appreciated, but just a reminder that in my email today, there'll be a link, and there's a tile on the app for reserving empty spaces on campus if you want to either study or attend a class virtually from a location on campus. We continue to have free testing on Tuesdays. We can check in with Nanci about how that's going, and weather permitting, that will continue for the next several Tuesdays. Members of the Lewis community can make reservations or contact the hotline team to see if they can find a specific time slot to attend. So now what I'd like to do is, as we begin the spring semester, I just wanted to maybe share some more summary information that we've picked up since COVID-19 started. We're always collecting information and studying it and making decisions based on data. And we share a lot of it. We shared a lot of our survey results, for example, at the end of the fall semester. But we have, in our preparations for the spring semester, we did reflect on quite a lot of information that was sort of concluded at the end of the fall semester. So I just wanted to share a little bit of that, just some tidbits of that really with you. And then Nanci might want to reflect on it as well after we bring her on. But a lot of this is wide-ranging in general. And then I said it was about the fall, but the first thing I wanted to share was really about last spring. So if we could look at the first slide in the presentation, this is a complicated chart, and I will try to direct your attention all the way to the right of this chart. The blue bar represents the completion rate. That's the percentage of classes that students passed in the spring of 2019, and the red bar represents the percentage of classes that students passed in the spring of 2020. So it compares the completion rate from the spring of 2019 with the completion rate in the spring when we had COVID hit us right in the middle of the semester and we had to go online. And you can see, I don't have it in front of me and my eyes aren't good enough to see those numbers, but it's 94 point something in both cases. So I think we went down 0.1% from year to year or something like that. The other bars are broken down by colleges, but the essential thing I wanted to share here is that students completed the same, their experience of the spring semester in terms of actually completing courses, successfully learning what they needed to learn in the courses was very much the same from year to year, and our faculty are absolutely responsible, our students are responsible actually for doing the work under trying circumstances, but our faculty also in their flexibility to find pathways for students to learn the material and complete courses is also a big part of that. The next slide is very similar. It's about the summer. same story, very similar. All the way to the right is the bar from the previous year and the current year. Also almost the same number in those from year to year, which is what we would expect in any kind of normal circumstance. So again, all of our courses were online in the summer, and students were able to complete at the same rate as usual. The grades in those periods were also, I believe they were actually higher in the spring and in the summer. I don't have information about that in this presentation, but so it's really great news. We haven't looked at the fall data in great depth yet because there's always a little bit of a lag time as we process the final grades and grade appeals and things like that. But it looks to me like the completion day rates will be good. And the grades might have gone down just very slightly from year to year in the fall, but we'll share that when we have it completed. But in general, we just feel really good about our ability as a university to deliver the education that we normally would and to do it successfully. So now we're going to shift gears and talk about COVID specifically. In the next slide, it's a little summary information about the number of positive COVID-19 cases connected to our campus, and it's broken down there by resident, commuter, faculty, staff, and off-site means members of our community who are either students or sometimes faculty who are doing work completely off of any of our campuses. Also had some results from, and Nanci might want to define that better than I just did, but that's basically what that means. So the total is 215. I just want to always stress that that does not represent cases that were caused on campus. That's a sum total of every positive case that any member of our community, our entire student community, and our entire employee community tested positive for from any cause. So it could, most common cause has to do with people's family arrangements, social activities off campus, and so on. And as I've said before, we are really vigilant, and Nanci might comment on this as well, but we've been really vigilant about tracing sources through our contact tracing process as much as possible to particular people and locations and so on. And there's just very, very, very little sources traced to, or there's 0 sources traced to classrooms and some other locations on campus like labs and gyms and so on had very, very small connections. And then our residential population is a little harder to calculate and talk about because they live here, they do things together, they go to parties and so on, or hopefully not too many parties together, but and so that's a little bit more complex. But again, this is more about sharing information about our community and the way that the COVID-19 has impacted our community members.
So you and Nanci might want to comment on this, and I know Nancy's going to be coming in very soon.
Everyone's thinking, why isn't she already here?
Nanci?
She's got all the answers.
But my simple math here, 7,000 people that are on our campus, 210 more or less, that's 3%. That feels like a really good number to me. I mean, I don't know if you and Nanci would say that, but I mean, that's a 3% of our community. And I know there were other people who may not have called the hotline, et cetera, but that feels like a very, responsible number and speaks to hotline, contact tracing, students, faculty, staff, all doing all these basic things, wearing their face coverings, staying at a distance, washing their hands. I don't know, but it feels like a good number.
Yes, I think that's true. I think it's a representative. I think we are. It's representative of the impact in our community, and some other information I'm about to share will support that. But I think we have outdone the community in some way, and I don't mean to say that in a competitive way, but we're absolutely a part of the community and impacted by the community, and I think we've done everything we can do to mitigate against that while continuing to deliver a high quality educational experience. So if we could just, we won't go this slowly on the others, but if we could just quickly look at the others, had to do with isolation and quarantine. Those are the number of students in isolation. That graphic on the top right says 59 isolation beds were utilized. That means we actually have 33 isolation beds on campus. They're empty as we speak right now, but over the course of people going into isolation, moving in and out of isolation beds, typically for 10 days, we had 59 isolation cases where beds were used. There are more than those in the residential community because we have living situations where people were able to isolate in their own rooms, depending on the situation. And then if we could the next one has to do with quarantine, and then and that gives some representation of our different populations and their quarantine. We're much more engaged with interest in quarantine around the residential population, and so it's not surprising that those numbers are large, or the largest of the group. Just reflecting back on the fall, I would say the quarantine and the isolation work, especially in relationship to the residential population, was probably the most intense part of the fall, and having to do with contact tracing, our students having to face that, a long 14-day quarantine through contact. Some of those numbers are the total number of quarantines, not the total number of students. So there's some students doing it twice in the semester, and so on. So the number of students and number of who are both quarantining and isolating in the residence halls was significant percentage. Going back to your percentage, that's a third or something like that who were impacted by it, and that's definitely something we're endeavoring to improve, in the spring semester. Okay, we can continue. Just a few. The others, this has to do with the impact on the hotline team and its management. And we've said it many times, but that group of people, and Nancy's one of the leaders in that group, has just done incredible, intense 7-day-a-week, 12-hour-a-day work sometimes in terms of more hours a day. And this gives a little bit of a sense of that. Is over 1,000 emails sent to the hotline team with reports or symptoms, and please continue to do that and to take advantage of this hotline team and what it has to offer and support for our students. The rest of what we have to offer or share here is sort of similar. It's consistent with what I said earlier around trends. This is, if I were staring at this at home for the first time, I would just look at the blue line and say it's the residential student population, and it gives some sense of the positivity trends over the course of the semester. So this is the 7-day rolling average of daily new positive cases. And so the top number is somewhere around 3.5 or so per day at the peak of that chart, and most of the days were very closer to 0. But just to get some sense of the trend line, you can really see that rapid increase in late October for both, for all of our populations. And this is broken down by residential students, commuter students, staff, and faculty. And the student populations are much larger than the employee populations, which is why those lines are higher for them. But the shape of the curve is very similar, and it really speaks to a very intense period that we had from late October to around November 10th or 12th or so, where numbers really went up and then they went down. They went down really a few weeks before Thanksgiving, but as we transitioned into Thanksgiving break, you can see that they have flattened. And if we were looking at this semester's version of this that we have started already, that's about 3 weeks old now, those lines are still flat. Next, we can look at similar shaped line. This is our isolation and quarantine line, and you can see the line at the top is actually the total of quarantines and isolations of residential students. And so that same shape, even a little bit more intense shape, we took more proactive action as the numbers started to go up in our community and in our local community to be more conservative around quarantine and isolation. That is also the time in retrospect when we made some mitigation decisions around no visitors to residential room policy and so on. And so that had a clear immediate impact. And then as we moved into Thanksgiving, it clearly dropped down to zero or close to zero again. And the last thing I think we want to share is if everyone can burn that image in their mind of what that shape is like, this is the positivity rate in Will County over the same time period. And I actually extended it to go into the present day or the most recent day that we can get information for. So that sharp upturn that we saw in our own numbers is exactly the same shape really as the positivity rate in Will County in that same time period. So that's kind of what I was saying earlier when I was saying we reflect our community for sure. And our mitigation efforts, again, related to quarantine, isolation, new policies on campus and so on made our line go down much more intensely than the county did. But if I could say one more thing about that line, I just want to note that it has continued to go down really since that peak in late October, early November, and with a tiny little increase right after January. But it continues to drop, and it is actually lower today than it was when we started the fall semester. And so we feel good about, really pleased at that context in our community with the numbers going down and our ability to learn what we learned from the fall semester's experiences and hopefully combined with vaccinations and so on, we'll be able to not have that steep increase in any time during the spring semester. So that's our goal. Okay, Nanci, we'd love to have you on now that we've talked about stuff that you know a lot about without you for this whole time. Welcome.
Yeah, thanks for joining us again, Nanci.
Happy New Year, everybody.
So good to have you.
Yeah, very great to be with you. I guess my first question would be, and this is Nanci Reiland, Associate Professor of Nursing. We've introduced her many times, but maybe some people are watching for the first time today, so welcome. And been a great leader of our contact tracing efforts on our hotline team, as well as just a leader in general on campus. So I guess first thing I'll ask is, do you have any reflections about what we just looked at or anything you want to add on to what I said?
Yeah, that was real interesting to see the combination of what we were doing on campus and what we were seeing on campus and what was happening in the community. We were assuming we were on track and kind of facing the same issues and challenges, but it's interesting to see that data come together. And I guess I have to say that's really what we continue to do on the hotline team is look at what are the numbers, what facts do we have, what experiences do we have, and those are how we are continuing to tailor recommendations. So I guess just to put a plug out there for students that might be getting some feedback from us if they need to isolate or quarantine, and if it maybe sounds different than what people had at different times, it's because we're trying to look at what are the most current recommendations and what is the best holistic approach for knowing the needs and how our students and our faculty and those on the Lewis community, how they move about the day and things. So
Are there one or two things about that, Nanci, that you would say, just in the way you just talked about it, that you have learned and implemented? Or what are the biggest changes in terms of how the hotline team is approaching this semester relative to quarantine or isolation or contact tracing that we learned because of all that data and all the analysis?
right, a lot of things are still in discussion as we're being cautious in these first few weeks. There's some things that we probably can go to as far as um, the CDC has put out, different options for reducing quarantine in some instances, but we're being really cautious about that because we do want to make sure our numbers, we're just starting back into a new scenario. We want to see the lay of the land first and also use those appropriately. The CDC has made those options, but they still are options. The full recommendation is for the quarantine is 14 days after an exposure. So we want to make sure if we are going to um, offer some of the lesser amount of time, that we're doing it in a practical and a monitored way, so that we can evaluate whether that is truly um, an effective way to handle, especially residential students.
That's great. Thank you very much. I mean, I can't say enough about you and your team, and again, these numbers that we're seeing and that analysis. You know, from my point of view, we faced some difficult times, but I think the team really approached it well and kept the community safe. And hopefully, we are beginning to, see some positive things on the horizon in terms of vaccines. And Chris, I know you want to maybe talk a little bit about vaccines, but I don't know if you want to move on yet from testing.
Yeah,
and,
I think, well, we had
you know,
one question, while we're still on the topic of the beginning of the semester, we did have a question come through about, essentially, could you explain the rationale for requiring the testing on move-in for the residential students? And I think if I'm understanding right, the subtext of the question is that, we essentially, students have been isolating away from campus for this whole time since Thanksgiving. Shouldn't we consider that a quarantine of sorts? And why do they need to do a test if they've been quarantining or self-isolating?
Okay, so a couple different points on there. So I guess ideally, if we could say students were going back to the location they were going to stay, and we're going to quarantine, not go out into the community, not visit their families, not travel, we probably would have been comfortable with having everybody come back without a test. We know that is not the reality. That is not how we live, and that's not how we live normally, nor during our break time, especially around the holidays. So the thought behind, and we didn't require the return to campus testing in the fall for various reasons, just the lack of evidence and knowledge about testing and the availability of everybody to get a test. And that is definitely has changed. We've become more aware and confident in some of the different types of tests, which is why we required for return to campus that it be a PCR test, not a rapid antigen, which is less sensitive for picking up infections in people that don't have symptoms. So that was the rationale behind that. We did try to find a window of time for testing. Now, had we known there was that testing was going to, for the most part, be a little quicker, when we were making these timelines, it was when in the time period where it was sometimes taking 5 to 7 days to get a test back, which is not it's not acceptable, but that was what was happening. So we wanted to make sure that people had a window to test, but then also get their results back and then act on those results. So if they did come back positive and had to do 10 days of isolation before they came to campus, that would happen more within their break time versus their time back to campus. And we did have a number of students that were asymptomatic and discovered they had a positive result on their return to campus. So luckily, those mostly came in that first week of January, and so they were able to isolate and come back at the time that they were expecting to. Now, whether those were kind of fresh cases, new cases, or whether they may have been positive at some time during the break and it was still showing up, it was still something that was much more effective to deal with that while they were away from campus versus them coming in, possibly getting tested for athletics or for some other reason, coming up positive, and whether they were infected or not at that time, we still would have to isolate them and treat that as a positive case and contact trace and everything else that we do with a positive case.
Great,
So that was basically our rationale. And I want to say students have been resourceful. They have found, testing all over the country. They've asked questions. They've said, I'm not sure if this qualifies for the type of test you need. And so they've reached out and we've given them feedback. And I want to say it's been fairly successful. We do have, a number of students that haven't submitted that requirement. And if they're listening now and they see their health pass is red, that is the reason. So if you're a resident student where we haven't been able to accept that test result, your pass is red. Some students have emailed and said, I've submitted my pass, my results, but my pass is still red. And often they've gotten an email, so check back on your email that would have come from one of the COVID team. There was probably something missing on your test submission, or it was a rapid antigen that we did not accept. So we would reach back out to them to ask them to update that test or update the information they sent us.
And also,
But
just to
all in
be
all, I think it's been good.
yeah, and just to be clear, that if a student has not submitted and they're coming up red on their app, contact us so that we can help get a test. You know, either go on a Tuesday or find a local provider of testing that's quick and so on. So we're still supporting students through that final transition.
Right.
And it is a relatively small group now, I think, that are there, which is great.
The housing is calling alternative plan. So, because we have some students that are awaiting their test results or whatever it might be, but they've come to campus, they're ready to move in. So Residence Life has a plan where they sign that they'll be quarantining until their test results, and then we can clear them.
So we probably want to go now to talk about vaccines. We have several questions about that. Maybe to begin with, we could maybe talk about where we're now hearing universities will be in the state of Illinois lists from 1 to 1B to 1C to 2 and so on, and what you've heard about that, and maybe we could all talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, there's been some confusion in some of the documents that have come out, and maybe it wasn't, I'm going to say intentional, but there was probably just some lack of clarity too when some of these original phase documents came out. And the education sector has been listed in 1B, the next phase that we'll be moving into shortly, and many of the documents. And so we did clarify with both the state and the county of what that meant, and that education sector, based on the state, is from K or pre-K to 12, not higher education. Some thoughts on that and reading through the documentation so you can go to IDPH. There's a whole, I think it's maybe 60 pages of a vaccination plan that's continually updated. And on there, they give some of the rationale of why certain groups fell into different phases. And in looking at phase 1B, and that is our 65 and older, and as we've heard too, that has kind of gone back and forth. The CDC originally wanted it to be 65 and older, with 65 coming in at the next phase. This state has decided to start with the 65 and older, which is a very large population, and a population that's going to be seeking the vaccine. Also in 1B are food and agriculture workers, but that can be confusing. It's not servers or those in the restaurants. It's actually more the manufacturing industry. Again, because of what was happening in summer and fall, those were pretty hard hit industries because of the production line and how people work together, and large plants had to shut down because of outbreaks. So I'm assuming that was the rationale behind that. Our postal workers, manufacturers, grocery store workers, so front-facing, customer-facing grocery store personnel, public transit workers, again, education, K through 12, and shelters and adult daycare. So that is within 1B. So sometimes I'll say the term essential workers, but really there's a lot of subsets of that, and some fall into 1B. The majority are going to fall into 1C or even later.
What are you
So
hearing?
education right now
Yeah, go ahead.
is kind of higher education, I'm going to say, is not really defined in a certain phase. There's some thought it might be 1C, but it may also, after 1C is phase 2, and the thought it may be in phase 2, which is really general population. those later phases, as we get closer to a phase, there's more definition and sometimes changes. So that's a long way of saying we're likely not going to be in the next phase, potentially not for a couple phases. As higher education educators or staff, we may qualify for other reasons, demographic or other work that we do.
Right.
Yeah, and I was just going to say, I was going to ask you, where you think, so we could end up in the kind of more general population in terms of what I would say the majority of our community of 7,000. There are members that we've already talked about on previous shows, but not everybody's watching the same show, that there are members of our community like you, Nancy, and others who are healthcare workers, some of our students who are, frontline healthcare workers, our police and safety professionals who have either already been vaccinated or will be vaccinated very soon because they fall into the 1A. I do want to say, and I know Chris has been involved in this, and I know, Nancy, you're constantly in touch with IDPH and Will County, that in groups that we belong to and that I, work with, so people that are trying to, pressure on the national stage, whether it's around funding for COVID relief or vaccinations, and then lobbying that we do down in Springfield, that we are advocating for our faculty, our staff, our students to be moved up in terms of the vaccination criteria level. But we're not alone, right? Higher ed is advocating, and as you said, restaurant workers are advocating, other people. But I wouldn't want anybody to think that we're sitting back. We do believe that given the work that we're doing and the populations that we serve, that putting higher ed workers and our students in a situation where they can be vaccinated sooner rather than later, it would be a good thing. But right now, the indications are that it could be 1C or 2 is what I'm hearing as well. So.
Right. And I guess if we look on the bright side of that, if they're making the decisions based on where cases and outbreaks have occurred, we've done a good job in higher ed. Universities and colleges across the country have really stepped up and really taken on a lot of the public health efforts that I think have then shown that we have a lot more ability to control the spread within our community. So I guess it doesn't bode well for us moving up, but it is a good, if we're looking from a justice perspective, we've done our part to protect those that really couldn't protect themselves. So.
Yes. And so, and I will just go to then, ideally the data is going to drive this, which I think it is, which is what you're saying from a state level. And I do want to say that, some of the people we're most worried about are really going to end up in 1B. That is those with significant comorbidities and those people over 65, which some people are in our community. And those people that are most vulnerable are going to get the vaccine, which doesn't mean nobody in our community will get the vaccine. It's just we're not going to get it as a group of 700 employees or 7,000 employees and students. I guess the one thing that I'd like to hear either one of you talk about is people have heard, and it is the case, that we have done some vaccinations on this campus. And will we continue to do that, even if it's not for our community, though some members may qualify? I guess what I'm saying is, again, somebody 65 and older might qualify for 1B, and they might be able to get that vaccine on the Lewis campus because we might become a site. But I'd love to hear the two of you talk about where we're at in that process of finalizing whether we will be a vaccination site or not, and when do you think we'll know, in a firm kind of way, how much we're going to be doing that on our campus?
Yeah, and I want Nancy to answer that, but I'll just, if I can add to that question, and this will be kind of our final topic. I think what I'm hearing also in the questions I'm receiving is people just want to kind of visualize. I know we don't know the future and how it's all going to play out in terms of vaccination availability, Nancy, but will people, when their time, when their category comes up, or will they be able to do it on our campus? And if not, do you have any advice about that, or any image that people can have in their mind about how to go about it when the time is coming. And if you wouldn't mind talking about the OSCO clinic and so on, that would be nice as well.
Yeah. So I just want to start out by saying, as we, talk about all this, and again, we're back into that time of uncertainty, right? It's a good uncertainty. It's more, I think um, what I like to, when I think, or I talk to people that are like, when can I get on the list? When can I get my vaccine? Which is great. It's awesome that people are being um, encouraged and empowered to take a role and to do something. But we have to think back, back in March, April, May, June, when we start just, that we need a vaccine. And we were talking at first, this may take a few years for us to get a vaccine. Here we are vaccinating, vaccinating people before the first of the year. So yes, we're anxious to get it, but we also have to realize this has happened. It's a miracle that this is all coming about, and we are going to have this protective vaccine a lot sooner than many of us would have thought in the early part of the pandemic. So whether you're able to get it in February or May, we're going to have it accessible to the wide majority of people before summer. So I know that doesn't help when you really want to get it soon, but so I guess let me go to the partnership with OSCO. So OSCO is a COVID provider through the health department, and we were approached because we've just been a really great community partner, as many are in Will County, and OSCO said we really want to help the county to get through this 1A phase, because that is part of the determination of when you can move to the next phase. And we have pharmacists that are available to vaccinate, but we need a big space. And so they approached us. We were able to help them with some space at the flight deck, and they vaccinated over 100 people that day. And we were able to bring in some of our 1A employees, our athletic trainers that do our testing on site, and be sure that they were vaccinated also. So we'll continue to do that. For these first two vaccines that are out, the Pfizer and the Moderna, you have to consider that there is the second dose, and that needs to be either for Pfizer around day 21 or Moderna around day 28. So when we're assisting with these, we have to make sure that we have a secondary space for them to come back and complete that second vaccination. We had lots of great comments from OSCO folks that came in, and then all the healthcare workers and phase one people that were coming in for the vaccination about, how this is really, it is a community. It's, we are all in, we all have to do our part. And by providing that space, that was a big assistance. And we look to continue to do that as we're able. We're hoping as the phases start to open up, then we'll be able to maybe provide an adjunct to OSCOs with some of our own vaccinators that can help bring in more of both the community and the Lewis community that fits within that phase. The $1 million or the mega $1 million question is, how do I find out and how do I get on these lists? And I think that's, if there was something that's missing within our planning was either at a federal or even a state level of more of a uniform way to register or to put in your interest level so that you could be notified. And also realizing that there's subsets of our population that can't use the technology or don't have access to the technology to be able to do that, and then find out, make appointments online and things like that. So it's being worked out. There is a new program that's coming out from the state that should help with some of that. Right now, I would encourage anybody that lives or works in Will County, you can access the Will County survey that's been put out on a number of our information. It's on our COVID site, also on the Lewis website, and fill that out. We've been told by the county, if you work in Will County, you could use your work address as a address on the site. And that's just one way to get into their system. So when you've identified if you've had your age, or if you're over 65, if you've identified if you've had some of the comorbidities that are going to be considered, or potentially some of our students work in a sector that may be an essential worker. You may be an Uber driver, and that's considered transportation. So you may be able to get your vaccine in 1B. So that's the best thing. Reach out to your county, and you can fill it out in your residential county and your work county also. And also, especially if you have seniors that are coming up soon now to get vaccinated, I'd have them check with especially if they go to a Walgreens, CVS, Osco, or Meijer pharmacy. Even some of the smaller pharmacies are now becoming COVID vaccine providers, and we'll be able to start taking appointments for that. Again, it's not going to be, 1B opens up next week and you get your appointment next week. It's going to take a little bit of time, but hopefully if people know that they have an appointment coming up in 3 weeks, they'll feel at least a little more secure with that.
Yeah, thank you so much. That's really great information, I must say. And I want to say again how grateful we are for you joining us today, Nanci. All the great work you're doing, but all the information that you have that I think is really helpful to our community.
Thank you. We're just happy that we're in this hopeful stage of seeing an end in sight of the pandemic.
Yeah.
Thank you, Nanci. I want to quickly, I know we're over on time probably, but the one quick answer to a question that came through, I think the only one we haven't answered, is about requiring vaccinations. And so I'll answer it, Nanci, just to say that we're talking about it. We, it's very early in that, and the question is really about fall. So we're considering it. We need to check on availability, efficacy, and, in communication with our network of other universities and health centers about how we would go about doing it. But it's certainly something we're considering.
Great. Well, with that, again, I want to say thank you, Nanci. Dr. Nanci Reiland has been on the show before, but we're really grateful for her being on today, providing us with really great information that I think is incredibly useful both on campus and for the broader community. Also want to say, as I mentioned at the beginning, that we're hopeful that next week we'll be focused on athletics. We're fine-tuning the guest list, but I think next week we'll talk about both those sports that are going on right now, but also the rest of the semester in terms of sports. Last thing I'll say before I do my complete wrap-up is all of you received an email from Dr. Sant, from Chris this week. I thought it was beautifully written, and so if you didn't open it up, because I know you get lots of emails from it, I really highly recommend that you open it up. It's it really invites us to be our best selves in the midst of what is a challenging time in our country's history, and who we are as a people, and really, as individual human beings. So thank you, Chris, for writing that. I thought it was really beautiful. So I just want to say, blessings to you and your family. Thanks for joining us today. Have a great week. We're excited to have you back. Goodbye.